our next speakers. We have a husband and wife team coming up. Let me introduce them one by one. Dr. Aneika Simmons is a professor at Sam Houston University. Her research is centered around creative performance, fairness, diversity issues, and leadership. Her husband, Anjuan Simmons, has led software development for over 2 decades. He excels at shipping features customers love and working with healthy teams. You need to know they've been married for 20 years now, and they have 3 teenage daughters. So we're lucky we have 3 teenagers, sorry. So we're lucky we have them here because those teenagers consume a lot of their time. So I'm not going to waste any more of your time. I'm turning it over to you guys.
All right, John, thank you so much for that generous introduction. I'm so happy to be here, and my wife is happy to be here as well. To those of you in Budapest, we really wanted to be there. We couldn't make it work from a family schedule perspective. I remember being in Budapest at Craft in 2016. I was starting my tech speaking career, and I remember walking on the Buda side, going to the castle, and Beyonce's Lemonade had just come out, and like I still think about Budapest whenever I hear that album. That's how much of an impact the city had on me. And I still remember being so beautiful and riding the funicular up to the top of the castle was an amazing time. And this talk is kind of the funicular of remote work. We want to give you an easy way to get to the top of managing remote teams all over the world. So let's go to the slides for the control center. You can go ahead and share our slides, and we'll go ahead and get right into it. So I really hope you all have been enjoying Craft and all the other talks, and we're so happy that you have decided to join us for our talk, Remotely Operated, Managing Scattered Teams. My name is Anjuan Simmons. I am an engineering coach at Help Scout. Help Scout is a global company, and we provide software for support professionals. And I am based in Houston, Texas. We're in Houston, Texas right now, but I have team members all over the world. My QA lead is in Vancouver, Canada. My PHP engineer is in Spain. I have a JavaScript engineer in Toronto. I have my Java engineer in Brazil. So we are a fully remote team, and Help Scout has really mastered the art of running remote teams. In fact, Help Scout's been in existence for over a decade, and it was fully remote from the start. And so I've learned a lot about managing remote teams, and I'm really excited about sharing what I've learned with you, because I really believe that we are now living in a new era, which requires a lot from the people who manage remote teams. And I'm really happy to be co-presenting today with my wife, as John said, of 20 years, Dr. Aneika Simmons.
Hello, I would say good afternoon there. It's 10 o'clock in the morning here. I think it's about 5 o'clock there. And we're so grateful to be able to present this information. As he mentioned, I am a full professor. And one thing that professors do, we teach, we do service, and we do research. And I have to say that my research is in leadership, but similar to Anjuan, I work with co-authors all over the world. We just published a paper with someone from China and someone else was in Australia, and we have myself in Texas and then others in Boston. And so I also understand virtual work and leading teams and working with teams all over the globe. And in addition to that, I also teach team leadership with the graduate course here at Sam Houston State University. So in my undergraduate degree at the University of Texas at Austin, I studied MIS, so I understand the technical components of this, but my PhD is from Texas A&M, where I studied organizational behavior and human resources. And we talked about all of these types of things, and we study, and I keep up with what's happening with leadership. And as Anjuan mentioned, we are in a new era. We are in a new space, and understanding the importance and best practices associated with dealing with and working with remote teams is critical. It may have been something that used to be optional or nice to have, but at this point, it's a critical best practices to make sure that you understand and have underneath your belt.
Absolutely. And I really believe that we are in the new era of scattered teams. We typically use the terms remote or distributed to describe teams that don't work in the same physical location, but I really don't think that remote or distributed really accurately describes our current reality. Those terms are just a little too neat. And something that really does not get talked about a lot when we talk about remote work companies is that there are really two types, right? The first type are remote first companies like Help Scout, where I currently work, where we've done the hard work over years of crafting rich remote experiences. But then the second type are what I call remote forced companies. And those are the companies that were thrown into remote work and supporting employees that weren't in the same location due to the pandemic. And these remote first companies emerged in 2019 because of this tiny virus, which radically changed work. And many of you looking at us right now, watching this presentation, you know this very well. You've seen your job, your companies totally upended by this virus. And while I'm happy to see infection rates go down and hospital rates go down in most parts of the world, we are still grappling with the ramifications of this virus. We saw almost every company in the software development industry in early 2020 shutting down their offices so that employees could work from home and try to help contain the spread of the virus. And while remote first companies experienced very little change, and I know at Help Scout, we very much were able to kind of keep doing business as usual, the remote forced companies really felt the stress of having their people scattered all across the world. And it often was up to individual employees to find some positive spin on the situation. In fact, many of you probably bought into the idea that working from home would mean that you could escape the noisy and often interrupt-heavy environments of offices, and that you could finally retreat to the zen of your office space. And many of us kind of bought into the idea that, all right, I can finally chill at home and have all the creature comforts of my home office while still getting things done. Right? The idea was that we could relax in our favorite spaces at home without worrying if someone would steal our lunch from the break room, from the fridge in the break room, or we didn't have to worry if our favorite tea or coffee was available because, well, we control the kitchen in our homes. And we finally had a thermostat we could control ourselves so that we didn't have to worry about being either too hot or too cold in our offices. At least that was the idea. I think Aneika has something.
Oh, yes. I mean, similar in academia, we had the exact same experience with regards to basically becoming more aware of and using Zoom, for example. We immediately during the COVID-19 pandemic, we had to move from in-person teaching to online and virtual. And I have students who are in Germany, believe it or not, and all over the globe, and having to manage those virtual teams. And so, yes, there was an allure of being able to have a more controlled environment at home. But of course, we know that in the same token, there's pros and cons with everything.
And so we had the reality of remote work, right? And that really, we're not really working from home, we're living at work. And a large number of us had to manage new challenges like raising children while managing all-day Zoom calls. And some of us had partners, maybe spouses or other partners who inhabited where we lived. And those partners were also working from home, which put new pressures on relationships. And all of this was done while dealing with being forcibly physically separated from our work colleagues. This isn't just remote. This isn't distributed. It's scattered. And so many people have dealt with scattered thoughts and scattered emotions every day. And even though the pandemic, I hope, is reaching that curve down and having less of an impact on our daily lives, we still deal with a world that's still grappling with a pandemic and in going to a post-pandemic world. And I think that good remote management can make the difference between scattered teams thriving or failing. And working at Help Scout has provided me with the benefit of working at a company that has a robust set of remote work policies. And, I've been thinking of an analogy to describe what I've learned leading remote teams. And, the one that emerged was really one of my pandemic hobbies, and that's flying drones. And so I don't know about you, but during the pandemic, I found myself with lots of time that wasn't spent commuting to work or at Help Scout, the breaks between meetings. or since the world was shut down, a lot of the time that we might have spent going to restaurants or going to spend time with family and friends, I was really freed up. And so like many of you, some of you may have taken up quilting, or you learned how to cook different things. I know a lot of people made bread. Well, I bought a drone, and I actually have it here. Typically when I'm on stage, I can't show it, but this is the drone that I have. It's the DJI Mavic Mini 2. And I love this drone. It's a lightweight drone. I love flying it. And I realized that as I began to increase my expertise controlling the drone, I realized that the drone is something that is designed to fly far away, but still be under my local management. And it's very similar to managing a remote team. Drones are designed to be remotely operated over large distances using a controller. And in many ways, if you are a software engineering manager, you have to do a lot of the same things that drone pilots do. And so this talk includes using concepts from flying drones to describe how to effectively manage remote teams. And there are three general concepts that we want to share with you today. The first concept is a good remote manager has to understand the importance of self-management. All remote is local. You cannot control how the people you manage respond to working remotely, because whether they're a front-end engineer, whether they're a back-end engineer, maybe they're in DevOps, maybe they're QA engineers, whatever software development team that you are managing, they're going to all have a wide variety of responses to the reality of working from home. And I know that some people are going back into offices, but even those offices are different. And so besides differences in roles, you have differences in personalities, right? One of the first things I learned as a manager when I started leading software engineering teams many, many years ago was that everyone's different, right? I have some extroverts, I have some introverts, I have some people that like more direct management. I have some people that are like, you know what, check in with me in a month, I'll let you know how it's going. And just like people respond differently to the everyday task of building software, a lot of them are responding differently to living in a pandemic or even a post-pandemic world. So you cannot control how people respond to working remotely. However, you can control your response. And how you respond can go a long way towards helping your teams navigate being scattered. Now, a key part of using a drone is the controller, right? So this is a picture of the controller, and I actually have the controller here with me. This controller totally operates the drone, right? And any issues I have with the controller are going to be immediately reflected in the behavior of the drone. The controller controls the drone's height, the direction, the speed, and these controls that manage those things, if they malfunction, I'm going to quickly have an out of control drone that will not be able to do what it was designed to do. And all of this is also true of managers who have remote teams. If you experience errors in how you operate as the controller of the team, then your team will not be able to benefit from the support that you provide them. So self-management is critical if the team works where you work, right? If you're co-located, but it's especially important if you have scattered teams. You know, if the batteries in your remote control die, then you will lose the ability to manage the drone, right? And this controller has rechargeable batteries, but they don't last forever. And when the control batteries die, guess what? My ability to control the drone dies along with it. So if you don't take care of yourself as a manager, as an engineering manager, then you'll lose the ability to take care of your team. And that's why healthy teams need healthy managers. And I don't really think we talk about this enough. But if you don't manage your own health as a manager, if you don't do the work of taking care of yourself, if you don't get enough sleep, if you don't have a really effective way to manage stress, if you don't stay hydrated and get enough exercise, then you will slowly see your ability to manage your team start to degrade. And so the better that your physical self operates, the better you'll be able to operate your team. So the first lesson I really want to share with you all is that you have to take care of your body. We all walk around in these, to be kind of crude, sacks of meat that we are mobilized in, and we have to take care of ourselves. We have to take care of these physical bodies, and that is critical. So the first lesson to be an effective remote manager is take care of yourself. I know often self-care is seen by some people as being selfish or as being not focused on your teams, but that's not true. If you take care of yourself, you will be a better manager. Second, you have to model the behavior that you want your teams to emulate. As a manager, I know that I have to have a very healthy PTO schedule, right? PTO stands for paid time off. Some of you call it holiday time or vacation time. But if, as a manager of a remote team, if you don't schedule a few weeks off a year or at least a few long weekends regularly on your calendar, then your team won't see you taking vacation. And guess what? They probably won't take vacation either. So as you burn yourself out, not taking time off, you're going to model that burnout response for your teams. So it's very important that you model healthy PTO, that you model healthy vacation. Also, one of the things that you have to model as a manager of a remote team, of a scattered team, is how you manage stress, how you manage when things don't go so well. As a manager, it's really important to sometimes say, you know what? I'm stressed out, right? I mean, start your team meetings by just saying, just very honestly, you know, I'm stressed out right now. I'm not at my best. I mean, we're going to have the meeting, but I want y'all to know that I'm dealing with maybe a migraine, or I'm dealing with feeling uncertain about things happening in my personal life. It's really important as managers that we let people know that it's okay to be human at work. And you do that by modeling that to your teams, right? The behaviors that you model will be reflected in your team. We always talk about culture and how we need to have healthy cultures at our companies. And I think that many of you probably work at companies that have healthy cultures. And I'm lucky to work at HelpScout, where we have an extremely healthy company culture, and that company culture filters down to every team at HelpScout. But I firmly believe that culture is not communicated. Culture is imitated. And your teams that you lead, especially if they're remote, will imitate how you operate. So it's really important that you operate yourself in a very healthy way so that you can help to manage your teams. Now, flying a drone in the United States means that there are a whole net of regulations that are controlled by the Federal Aviation Administration, also called the FAA. And it's really important that as a drone pilot like myself, that I'm always in compliance with the support structure that controls what happens in the sky where my drone is operated, right? And so there are all these rules about how high I can fly my drone. I have to make sure that I'm in line with the FAA about where I fly my drone. If I'm near an airport, I can fly over airports. So all these things that I have to be aware of when I fly my drone. When I operate my drone, there's always kind of upper command that I have to be aware of. Well, you know what? The same thing applies to remote teams. You have to make sure that you maintain air support, right? The FAA is air support for drones. In the same ways, you have a support structure that you work in. Now, as an engineering coach at HelpScout, the title will be Senior Engineering Manager at most companies. I report to the VPE of HelpScout. The VP reports to the Chief Experience Officer, who reports to the CEO, right? And so as a manager, it's really important that I effectively manage up, that I make sure that I maintain close relationships with my management structure, because guess what? I am the link as a remote manager between my teams all over the world and central management. And my leadership team is trusting me to manage my team. And if I demonstrate the ability to understand what upper leadership wants from my team, and if I can make sure that my team reflects those expectations, then I'll be better able to support and make sure that my team is successful. Because if I am showing as a remote manager that I have the VPE needs in mind, that I'm always aware of the technical roadmap that this person is trying to accomplish, if I'm always aware of the product function at my company, that the product roadmap is reflected in what my team does, then I'm able to get a lot of leeway in what I do with my teams, right? As a manager, one thing that I found is that if I successfully operate my team, if I help my team become successful in shipping features to customers and all the things that are expected of my team. In Health Scout, we do objectives and key results, OKRs. I'm sure many of you use those as well. If we meet our OKRs, I get a ton of leeway in what I can do. And so it's really important that I, as a remote manager with teams scattered all over the planet, that I get really good at keeping that link between myself and upper management. So the better you manage up, the better you'll be able to support your remote team. And if I could summarize this first lesson, it will be this way. Self-care sets you up to be a better manager, meaning that your ability to take care of yourself, the ability to take care of your teams by how you model, how you operate to them, and also your ability to take care of your leadership linkages, right? The way that you link up to upper leadership, those are so critical to being successful remote manager. Now, I'm going to go to my wife, Dr. Simmons, for the second concept for managing scattered teams.
Yes, I just want to reiterate the power of just being transparent at work and being, of course, in a professional manner, but the power of being genuine and people being able to be their authentic self. That itself, when you're not putting on a mask at work and you can be who you are, of course, meeting deadlines and pursuing goals, that will lower the stress level when I can be my authentic self and speak the truth of who I am and the experience that I'm currently going through in my life. So that's really important. And then when he talked about managing upward, it's really important to understand some of these leadership concepts. Is my leader a transformational leader? Are we going through a time of change? Is it a transactional leader? Are we maintaining the status quo? So it's all those types of things that we can read about and make sure that we're communicating and dealing with our leadership appropriately. So the second point is that the second concept is communication. I do have a master's degree in organizational communication from the University of Houston, and this is just something that's critically important to understand is communication. And what we're getting at with the drone analogy is that the strong signals cut through the noise. So the entire reason I believe my husband flies his drone is to have something in his hand that he can kind of control with the radio signal, and the drone is kind of receiving those commands and going through the sky. And it's important that you want to move any interference as possible, just like with any other radio frequency like microwaves or cell phones. It's that communication tower that's going to have that key communication link. And when we think about talking with other people, we want to make sure that the noise and the interference that we may sometimes, and it could actually be noise, meaning volume, but it could also be the fact that we're communicating in different tones, or just the way that we're communicating and how we're encoding language. So if we move on, and so in software engineering, it's my understanding that there's the concept of drive, which is don't repeat yourself. However, as a manager of scattered teams, or even myself as a professor with having my co-authors all over the globe, and I have students all over the globe, you want to make sure that you're not saying drive, don't repeat yourself, but deliriously repeat yourself. You need to communicate yourself in continuously doing so verbally, in videos, in emails, in posts, what have you, in Slack. You know, you cannot assume that just because you communicate something once, that everyone on your scattered team will get it or that they'll receive it. There's so many sources of interference between you and your team. There are regular distractions in your homes. Like we said, we have 3 teenagers. Our oldest is a boy, a young man, and then we have a middle child, a son as well, and then our daughter is the baby. And so there's all these things that are going on. Of course, we had to deal with the global pandemic. It's going down, it's going up, and all kinds of noise in our environment. And so it's important to understand that, you know, when people may not hear you the first time, it's not an issue of disrespect, or it also may not be that they're not paying attention. It's just that there's so many distractions that are happening, that it's just something that is a part of our environment, particularly in remote and virtual work, that we need to make sure that we communicate it. So we may need to announce something on a status meeting, over a video call, follow up with a post in Slack, and that's okay. It's okay to do that, and maybe even have that follow-up one-on-one meeting, because we know about media richness, meaning that, you know, having a Zoom call is richer than texting someone. You know, having that you know, a Teams meeting, what have you, is something that is richer than just sending someone a document. And I do want to say, from a researcher's perspective, that the research suggests that we spend 40% of our day listening. If you think about that, 40% of your day is spent listening. However, we generally only retain 25% of what we hear. So that means we retain 1 of 4 things that we hear. And that's just the way that we're made. So we need to make sure that we understand that, respect that, and not be offended by that in any way. So thus, the repetition is key. We should work to not be uncomfortable doing so. So documentation is a big part of communication in co-located teams. It's really important to make sure that you document things and keep things updated. I remember I used to work for Accenture and at Capgemini Ernst & Young. And I remember during the week, I would do work during the week. And then on that Friday or whatever the last day of the week was, I would send a summary of what I did all week to my managers. And so it's just that documentation so people can be on the same page. So when people join your team, or if it's something happening about how to proceed when you're several time zones away, so you may be going to bed writing this and someone else will be reading it in the morning. And so it may be, we're not getting it at the same time. So it's important to have an important documentation system to make sure that people understand what they're doing, what you're doing. And you need that documentation for engineering standards, dealing with build issues and all the critical functions of your team. And as the manager of a scattered team, you should have a strong documentation presence. This can include posting a weekly video, giving your team a new preview of the week ahead, providing thoughtful comments and proposals and specifications, creating walkthrough videos and describing new tools and processes, and other types of media that can help guide your team. Now, of course, we don't want to fall into excessive documentation. And we just talked about wellness and burnout and stress. So don't feel overwhelmed. What we're doing is just providing options. And so you can use what works best for you. And so we need to understand the second agile value, that working software is more valuable than comprehensive documentation. However, that doesn't excuse us from right-sizing the amount of documentation our teams need. So it's not doing everything, but what is meeting the needs of the people that you're working with. So you'll also have to tailor communication. That means understanding how people process information. So I am an extrovert. I get energized by dealing with people and being out and about. I'm married to my wonderful husband who is an introvert. And if we're out too long and doing too much communication, it may drain. So we need to understand the differences of how people operate and how they learn. And we know that there's different frameworks for personality. And we know that personality is a relatively stable set of characteristics that influences an individual's behavior, okay? And it can be influenced by heredity or environment, how I was raised. And there's 5 that one framework suggests: that's openness to experience, agreeableness, conscientiousness, extroversion, and emotional stability. And I'm not saying we have to all do personality assessments, but it could be helpful, especially in this environment, to understand how people receive and want to connect with others in terms of communication. So some people prefer to receive information visually, while others prefer to have it written down. So when asked for a decision, some people like to get pre-reads to process beforehand, while others like to just speak off the cuff. So you have to understand how to tailor your communication. And it's really important when you're co-located with a team, but it takes a new urgency when you're dealing with scattered teams. A huge part of communication is nonverbal. So I'm giving you those nonverbals now. I'm using my hand gestures, I'm making eye contact, I'm fluctuating my tones, and all those things suggest that I am listening. You have my attention. When anyone was talking, I would turn towards him. And the literature suggests that what you're listening to and what you're paying attention to, your body will move towards. So if you're ever talking to someone and they're this way, but their feet are kind of turning that way, they're giving you a nonverbal cue that they're trying to go a different direction. So we have to be careful of those of our body language, particularly when we're dealing in these type of remote environments. So since we're on a video call with our teams, well, we're only seeing them for shoulders up, right? And sometimes if they prefer to not live under the cycloptic stare of a live webcam all day, we have to sharpen our communication as much as possible. And one thing about communication: practice, practice, practice. There's nothing wrong with communicating some things in the mirror. When I worked for Accenture, they had someone come in, videotape us, and we watched the videos with some experts, and it really helped us learn how to communicate in a professional manner and how to move things forward. So you have to tailor what you're saying so that you can clearly get your point across at every point of communication. So our theme here really is that clear communication keeps your team moving in the right direction. And that's what we want to do. We want to continue to move forward in a healthy, productive manner.
Yeah, Anika, you did a great job with that. And one thing that I've learned managing scattered teams is that if you want people to hear something once, you have to say it 5 times, right? That's kind of a general guidance that I've heard before. You don't want to obviously be rude or excessive, but it's just clear that people need help to understand what you're trying to say. I think you have also a diagram to walk through on
Yeah,
this slide.
yeah, absolutely. And so this is from Hellriegel and Slocum, an interpersonal communication model. And I know it may look a little bit overwhelming, but I liked it because when Anjuan's talking to me about his visual with the drones, you can see that this talks about transmitting, it talks about receptors. But if you just kind of look at this, we know that communication with people can be a fairly complex situation. And what you're trying to do is that when you pour meaning into something, you want 100% of what you're pouring into your communication to be received by the receiver. But the reality, that doesn't happen. So we encode messages, meaning we decide what terms and how we're going to use it, how we're going to transmit. And that's to the sender, how we're going to send it. And that is so powerful in 2022, because back in the day, you wrote a letter or you talked to people face to face. But now, do I schedule a phone call for this? Do I text? Do I put this in Slack? Do I set up a Zoom meeting? So making the decisions about what channel I want to use is important when you're understanding the receiver or the person hearing what you have to say. And they have to have the receptors to be able to receive what you're saying and then decode the message. So sometimes I remember at British Petroleum, I believe I consulted there, you work for some places where they have all these acronyms that they're using. You don't even know what they're saying. And so you have to make sure that you're encoding and using terms and communication that someone can decode and receive. And you can see that this just is a continuous cycle as we're communicating. And that point, potential barriers in the middle there, what that potential barriers, that's the noise. And that could be actual noise, like when we were younger and we used to go dancing, the music would be really, really loud, so you had to raise your voice to be heard. Or it could just be a bad communication, or it could be a slow internet connection, what have you. And so these are all the things that we have to think about. We don't want to be overwhelmed, we just want to be aware. And so this is just a model, just to say, and Dr. Hellriegel and Slocum did a great job including this. And this is just a way that human beings communicate. You can look into this a little bit more, but I really think it's important as we communicate more virtually and remotely that we have a better grasp on the intricacies of communication.
Absolutely. The third and final concept that we're going to share with you today is person management, right? That when you're managing scattered teams, managing the people in those teams is really important. And, this really means that you have to get personal. With this drawing, the drone, I have to understand how it works, right? And so the drone records everything on a small storage card. And again, I can pull it out and hold it up. You probably couldn't see it because it's so tiny. But to transfer the footage from the drone to my computer, I have to take the SD card out of the drone and put it into my laptop to download the data. But you know what? There are times when I forget to put the card back into my drone. So I'll have to go out to the field to capture some drone footage, but the card is still inside my laptop. You're like, well, Anjuan, what's the big deal? Well, the drone can actually record pictures and video over the radio connection from the controller. And so it'll record some footage, but it's going to be way lower in quality than if I had remembered to put the SD card back inside the drone. I mean, when I forget to put the SD card back into the drone, the footage is like it's from 1988, right? It's just very low quality. And so when I fail to properly prepare my drone by returning the storage card to it, I get results that are far inferior to what it can do otherwise. You know what? The same thing applies to your scattered teams. You have to continually prepare your people for what's ahead in order for them to be successful. And so, this preparation has to be done on a person-by-person basis. Like I said before, everyone on your team is different. This is especially true when they live in different countries. So the person, like I said before, that lives in Brazil is in an entirely different cultural context nationally than the person who I manage who lives in Spain versus people in the United States. And even in the United States, right, there are regional differences. And so you can't just look after the team from afar. You have to directly invest in each individual on your team, no matter where they are around the world. And that really means that onboarding is critical. In fact, a lot of people say that onboarding and retention are two sides of the same coin. I think that my wife has something to say
just real
about
briefly,
onboarding.
understand that, onboarding is the action or process of integrating new employees into an organization or familiarizing a new customer or client with one's product or service. And basically, when we think about it, orientation is like an event, but onboarding is a process. It's a long-term process. And what we're trying to do is acclimate people and socialize them and get them engaged. And those first 30 to 60, 90 days are critical, that we have that process that lasts, that where people see that, we're here, we want you to be successful. These are the tools and the resources that you need to make sure that you are becoming a part of our environment. So again, onboarding is about socialization and making sure that people are engaging. Okay, so with Anjuan, I think he'll continue more.
Right. And so you may be thinking, you know what? Everyone on my team has been onboarded, right? They've been onboarded for a long time. And the same is true of my team. I joined Help Scout 2.5 years ago. Some people joined when I joined. We all went through onboarding. We have a great onboarding process. And so many of you have team members who were onboarded years ago. Maybe you were onboarded years ago. But think about this. Have there been any changes to how you write code, how you deploy code, even how you do production support since you were onboarded, right? Have there been any changes in leadership? Have you changed since you were onboarded? And I think that if you think about it, you may realize that, wow, there's been lots of changes since I was onboarded 2 years ago. We've had changes in the company. We've had changes in our policies. The team compositions have changed. Our leadership has changed. And I would imagine that for a lot of you watching, this is really true. So you may even have to re-onboard everyone on your team, including yourself, because the team is probably different enough that being successful now is radically different than what success during the last onboarding session presented. So it's really important that you have a healthy onboarding process, especially if you're someone in a remote forced environment. So you think about your onboarding and think about everyone who you manage, especially if you've gone to working remotely, and you may want to consider either entirely onboarding everyone or at least picking out the parts of the onboarding process that has changed. Also, individual attention is so important. Just like my drone needs individual attention to make sure that it's ready, you have to focus individually on each member of your team. That means having rich and robust one-on-ones. I don't know if you do one-on-ones, but one-on-ones are an essential part of my management style. This is when I get with my team members individually, weekly, to just have a talk. And I really want to make sure that one-on-ones are never canceled. They're always robust, and that it's not a status meeting, right? One-on-ones are not status. I can get status from the Jira board, from standing for our standing meetings and all that. One-on-ones are the opportunity for me to get to know the person. One tradition we do at Help Scout is a fika, which is spelled F-I-K-A. Anyone watching from Sweden, you know what fika means. So fika is a Swedish word that means to stop working, take a break, maybe get a nice beverage, maybe get a pastry, and talk about something other than work. And we have an app in Slack called Donut that will randomly link people up to have a fika. And this isn't just engineering. I've had fikas with people from marketing, from sales, from senior leaders in the company. And so it's a great way, it's a great tradition to connect with people, because when you cannot connect in person, it's important to find a sweet way to connect remotely. All right, and then there's recognition. We have to find ways to recognize individuals for their contributions. At Help Scout, we have a channel in Slack called Warm Fuzzies, where we call out exceptional work done by our people. As a manager, I also have budget for what we call a spot bonus that I can use to give cold hard cash to people who truly go above and beyond. So really the summary for this lesson of managing scattered teams is that by giving individual attention to the people you manage, that mitigates the effects of remote isolation. All right, so let's go ahead and summarize what we've gone over today, right? Self-management, right? The lesson there is self-care sets you up to be a better manager. Communication, Clear communication keeps your team moving in the right direction. And then finally, person management, giving individual attention to the people you manage mitigates the effects of remote isolation. Now, some of you, while we've been talking, you've been thinking like, you know what, these are great principles, even if you're working co-located, right? If you have people you walk past every day, these are good principles. But I really do believe that these principles take on even greater importance when teams are scattered. And that's especially for those of you who are in a remote forced environment. All right, thanks for listening to our talk. We would love to have this be a conversation. Our Twitter handles are in the lower right-hand corner of every slide, so please feel free to follow us. And then you can also contact us through Craft. They will get you our contact information. And I really wish you well. We wish you well as you help your scattered teams feel more connected and more effective.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to stop sharing, and hopefully the control booth can put us in full screen. It's time for Q&A. John, what you got?
Okay, great. I love the presentation. I actually love the word scattered teams because really remote teams don't make it. I absolutely love that. Great, wonderful speech. And we do have a question from Dominique. I've only managed remote teams of senior grade professionals. Do you have suggestions on how to empower junior entry grade team members in a remote situation?
Right, that is a great question, Dominique. I'll say something. If Aneika has something, then she can also fill this question. I have to be honest, right? At Help Scout for a long time, we very much hired senior engineers, right? So all of our, if you go to Help Scout jobs, right, and I'm hiring right now, and so you'll see that, you know, I'm hiring senior JavaScript engineer or senior JVM engineer, right? So we typically hire senior engineers because if you're a less experienced, and we typically try to avoid using senior and junior because junior has kind of the connotation that you're like less than. So I do want to say that out loud, that we are going away from senior and junior and talking about experience, right? So I'll use less experience as opposed to junior engineer. So we have recently begun working on what can we do to help less experienced engineers be successful. We've actually started doing this. So one of the things that we have found to be helpful, Dominique, is onboarding, right? And Aneika very much talked about onboarding, how onboarding and retention, I think I said this part, are two sides of the same coin. So if you do want to start helping less experienced engineers be successful in a remote environment, onboarding is critical. So that means you probably have to pay a little bit more attention. You probably have to have entirely new onboarding modules that are designed to help you bring in these people. Also, you have to partner with your talent team, right? Meaning that you're going to probably have to go to new places to attract and retain these people to get them into your hiring process. So it's very important that if you want to hire more or less experienced engineers, you have to partner with talent to get them into the company. And then when they're there, you're going to have to onboard them. The third thing that I'll say before turning over to my wife is that you're going to have to really invest in a good mentoring program, right? I really believe that mentoring is vital for any engineer of any experience level, but it is especially important for less experienced early career engineers because they're going to need that help, those touch points of someone, and not just someone that when you join helps you figure out where the GitHub repos are and they go away, but no, someone who will make a long-term investment in the success of this new hire because they're going to be less experienced than most of the engineers currently at the company. Aneika.
John, can you repeat the question?
The question's gone now, but basically it was how do you manage junior entry level engineers as opposed to senior engineers?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I agree with everything that Anjuan had to say, but expertise is most important. So you want to make sure that your tools are sharp. So one thing that you can do is just make sure you're going to conferences, webinars, listening to podcasts, making sure that you're knowing that what is at the cutting edge of your field and what you're doing and what your contribution is to the team and to the organization. And I think as you do that, along with mentorship, as you do that, along with having an organization that has a kind of high touch environment, I think that'll help you be successful for sure. But just keep everything you're working on, keep it before you. When I was doing SAP, I just went to all the conferences. I was new. Everything I could get my hands on, I would read, I would have lunch with people who had been doing it for years, and I just kept it before me always. And that helped me refine my skill set.
Yeah, a great training budget, a great learning and development program can go a long way toward those less experienced engineers being successful. I think we have time for one more question, if there's one more question from the audience.
Well, there's two more, so if you can make it quick, you might be able to answer two more.
Yeah, we can do the two.
Okay.
Do you see a significant difference in productivity between remote and on-site working? And this is from Anonymous.
I've worked at fully remote companies like Help Scout. I've worked at co-located companies where you all work in an office. Yes, and again, I'm biased, right? I've been working remotely for a long time. You had to pay me in gold bars and like Bitcoin. I mean, Bitcoin's kind of down right now, but you know what I mean. So you had to pay me a lot of money to go work in the office. And I think that there's really one key reason why remote teams outperform those that are not. And that is you can find talent anywhere in the world, right? If you work in an office, you are constrained by the people who can physically get to that office, right? That's probably 20-mile radius, 30-mile radius, at most 40-mile radius. And then the people farther away are going to be upset because they're spending 2 hours every day in traffic. You have a big cap on your talent acquisition when you are co-located at a remote company. I can find talent almost anywhere in the world. There's like tariffs and taxes and all these things that make it complicated, but I think that you can get world-class talent in a remote company in a way that's almost impossible at a co-located company, simply because you can hire almost anywhere.
Yeah, and I would say theoretically that's definitely the case, but of course it's about the structure and the health of the organization. So if you work for an organization that is healthy and gives you the resources and the tools that you need to be successful remotely, by hiring people who are engaged and people who are self-motivated, who like a lot of autonomy, where discretion is allowed, then I think it could be successful. So I think it really depends. I think it depends.
All right, next question.
The last question. Scrum has the notion of having meetings together like a daily meetup. How do you do that across time zones? Any tips? Also from Dominique.
Dominique with the great questions. Okay, all right. So at Help Scout, we do not have in-person stand-ups because we are across multiple time zones, right? My westernmost, for the US perspective, person is in Vancouver. My easternmost is in central Spain. So there's really not a good time. So we do stand-ups in Slack. We have a Slack channel called Stand Up, or SUP, sub channel. And then people do their daily stand-ups whenever they wake up. Some people do at the end of their day. And so they flow into that Slack channel as people have time in their day to do that update. It's the same format as a daily stand-up, right? What have I worked on since the last update? What am I planning to do today? And then are there any blockers? So we also have an entire planning cadence for our meetings, how we do planning meetings, how we do OKR syncs that I can go, if you, again, ask me on Twitter. But we remote environments have robust ways to handle all the Scrum ceremonies. And I think that we've handled them really, really well.
Yeah, and from an Academy of Management, from a professor, I work with people from all over the country, London, all over the globe as well. And what we do is we rotate. So sometimes we'll meet where I have to get up early in the morning to meet with the team. I'm actually on a communication team on Academy of Management. I get up early sometimes for us to meet, and then sometimes I'll stay up late. So we kind of rotate. So it's not consistent in that, we're kind of bearing the burdens kind of equally across the team. Good question.
All right. Thank
you. Last two comments. Dominique sends, thanks guys, inspiring talk. Thanks for the in-depth replies to my questions. And Anonymous says, not a question. I loved your presentation. I am all for that empathetic start to meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Anonymous. I owe you $100.
Great. Aneika, Anjuan, thank you so much for your presentation. We loved it.
Awesome. Thank you, Craft. You all enjoy. Take care.
Okay.